Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and honor to be sharing with you this evening. And when I gave some thought about what I wanted to talk about tonight, I decided to frame it around a question that I've been thinking about for quite some time. And that question is, who gets to design? And as you've heard, my work is in the area of design, in the field of design, and more specifically in this field of design thinking. But I want to share 5 data points to help you in the journey with me of how I've been thinking about this question of who gets to design. The first is a story that goes back to 2004. I used to serve on the board of a wonderful school here in Philadelphia called CHAD, the Charter High School for Architecture and Design. And the director of development one year was able to get an amazing team of designers from Martha Stewart Design to come to the school and meet with a group of, I think they were about 11th grade age students. And so this group of designers is presenting to these high school students. Now these are predominantly African American students from Philly who probably would not have even considered the field of design or architecture had it not been for this school. And part of the mission of the school was to expose some kids who typically would not have gone in those fields into the field of design. So this amazing, well-pedigreed team of designers is explaining their design process. And one of the things that they show is a can of roach spray. And they begin to explain the design process and the package design process. And on the can were flowers and plants and insects and bugs. And one of the students raised his hand, and the team member from Martha Stewart Design said, yeah, sure, please, your comment, your question. And the kid said, that's not good design. And they said, okay, but why do you say that? Why do you think this isn't good design? And the kid said, well, my sister is illiterate. She can't read. And if she saw that can of roach spray insect repellent, she would think that it was air freshener. And she would proceed to spray that around the room. And the design team had no response. They thought, he's right. This isn't good design. That's my first data point in thinking about this question of who gets to design. Second data point, around the same time, I was still a professor at Philadelphia University, and I had the privilege of going with some of my colleagues and a group of about 20 students, undergraduate students from Philadelphia University, South Africa. And at one point, the group of faculty, we were able to meet with some faculty from the School of Architecture and Design at a university in Johannesburg. Now, consider this, in the year around 1990 is when Nelson Mandela was liberated from prison, and the nation of South Africa began its process of really dissolving apartheid. So it was a really short history. Now we're in the year 2004. And the group of faculty are sitting around, they're talking about this question of who gets to design? And who do we bring to our university? And it was really a simple question of who gets to come to the university to study architecture, to study industrial design, to study graphic design. Because if you think about the systems that were in place, you still had so many young people who were living in shanty towns where there was no SEPTA, there were no access to cars to get to school. And so having a conversation with other faculty, other professors in this field of design in 2004 with these very different systemic issues was very compelling to me. Third data point. Recently, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who was a Latina. She's from Venezuela, and she's an industrial designer. And I was talking to her about preparing for this talk. And she said, you know, it's really important that you're talking about this. When I first started studying industrial design, an established designer told me, you probably won't make it in this field. And I said, wow, he said that to you? It's pretty bold, it's pretty nervous. She said, yeah. I said, well, how did you respond? What did you say? She said, well, a part of me was very practical. I kind of took him at his word and thought, yeah, it's going to be really hard. In my program, I was the only Latina. There were no African Americans, no other people of color. But to have someone in the field tell you in that blanket statement, it's highly unlikely that you're going to make it, is pretty unsettling. Now, as was read in that very long introduction, I have a background in anthropology. And the third data point is this. It's 1989. I'm in the college bookstore. My arms are loaded down with books. I'm thinking, how am I going to pay for all these books? There was no such thing as rent a textbook at that time. And I decided on a whim to take Intro to Anthropology. I needed another course. And I'm looking through the books in my arms, and one of the books is a book called Anthropology for the 90s. And it was edited by a woman named Janetta B. Cole. And I'm looking through the book, and I turn it over, and on the back is a photograph of the author, Janetta B. Cole. And Janetta B. Cole is a black woman. And she had a manicure, and she had lip gloss on. And what was more shocking to me than here's an African-American woman who's the editor of this book called Anthropology for the 90s was my reaction. My reaction was stunned. I was embarrassed that I was surprised that it was a black woman who was an anthropologist, and then I had to ask myself, why did I have that reaction? And it was because, despite how privileged my educational experiences had been up to that point, I actually did not think black folks were anthropologists. In my mind was an image of old white dudes digging in the dirt in a village in Africa. That's what I thought an anthropologist was, because that's what I always saw on National Geographic. And that stopped me in my tracks. Needless to say, that was a pivotal moment for me. I ended up studying anthropology. I've used it practically every day of my life in my work. I ended up even writing Janetta B. Cole, who at the time was the president of Spelman College, and she was kind enough to write me back, and it meant the world to me. The other data point that I want to share, in addition to Chad, in addition to the faculty from South Africa, my friend from Venezuela, my experience in anthropology, is a reflection that's even more ancient, back to the 16th century, the Renaissance period. And when we think of the Renaissance period, we think of Galileo, we think of Da Vinci, we think of Michelangelo. We don't think of women. And I recently was in Florence, Italy, on a project with my graduate students, and a short anecdote was shared about the daughter of Galileo. Galileo didn't have the money in his coffers to pay for a dowry for his daughter to be married. So in the 16th century in Italy, as a woman, if you were not married off, the next best thing was you were shipped to a convent. Now, what's the link between all of these stories? I started out with this question of who gets to design. The question that occurred to me many years ago was, who gets to practice anthropology? And why does that matter? Who gets to invent? And why does that matter? And we now don't think it a bizarre question to be critical of the gender gap in what we look at upon as inventive science. But it's a really important question, and the opportunity that the history of anthropology gives to design is to shift that paradigm and to really examine that question. So I keep throwing around this word design, so I thought I would share my version of what design is, what designers do. There's 5 principal things, in my view, that designers do. The first really important thing is that designers get to shape the way we move through this world. Designers get to shape the way that we navigate this world, whether it's the garments that we wear to keep us warm, to make us feel confident, to make us feel pretty, whether it's the building structures that we work and live in, if it's the shape of a doorknob, a light switch, the design of the interface on a website. Designers have the ability to shape the way we move and navigate this world. The second thing the designers do is that they make stories manifest. Excellent designers, if they're doing their job really well, they are listening and observing and collecting stories about what is easy for people and the objects and products that they're using, what's not so easy. And they're incorporating those insights into the products and services that they design. The third thing the designers do is they get to question everything. And they love to ask, what if, right? What if instead of having the car operate on gas, the car operated through solar energy only? What if? And that's a very empowering place to be. And the final thing that designers get to do is they get to prototype. All of this means that designers are agents of change. So having said what designers get to do, let's revisit this question of who gets to design? Who gets to be an agent of change? Who gets to shape the way we navigate through this world? And why does this question matter? Well, there are a lot of startling, disturbing statistics. For example, less than 0.5% of the registered architects in the United States of America are African American women. To be specific, 0.2% of all registered architects in the United States are African American women. Second scary statistic, approximately 7% of graphic designers are people of color. A lot of the other design fields don't really keep track of these statistics because the numbers are very, very small. On a more global level, we know that good design leads to great innovation. So we think of the bottom of the pyramid. We know for a fact that some of the most innovative design comes from the resourceful work that happens from the bottom of the pyramid. There's a lot of examples from the country of India. You think of the Tata car, you think of the work that Procter & Gamble did with the Gillette razor in trying to reverse engineer how do you design a razor at a certain margin, minimal amount of materials, certain production processes for a group of people who may not shave every day. Those insights were scalable to other economies. And we also know about Jugaad innovation, which comes from the country of India, which is this ability to make something out of nothing. And all of these insights become scalable. So the question matters because we need to access all of these resources. But knowing that we have these disturbing statistics is not enough. I think today for most enlightened people, inclusion and diversity is like apple pie and motherhood. We know that it matters. The challenge is, what do we do about it? And that's something that I observe and experience every day. So here are some calls to action. The first thing that I think we really need to do in the field of design, and this is, again, is transferable out of design, is to do what I call the curiosity caveat, which is to flip the principles of design and design thinking inward into ourselves and to fine-tune the curiosity that makes for great design to ourselves. So what are some of the principles of great design? The first is empathy, the ability to have a human-centered focus and to put yourself in the shoes and process of others. The second is this principle of lateral thinking, to be able to connect the dots between disparate areas. Design needs to question how far are we extending that process of lateral thinking. The third principle in design is prototyping, those rough draft, ugly mock-ups. Where are we testing these prototypes? For example, in the field of user experience design, so often prototypes are tested among other UX designers, not among people like me. And finally, story. Whose stories are we collecting? So there is a designer, a famous designer named Jerry Hirschberg, who's an automotive designer from Nissan, who developed this term called creative abrasion. And he used a process during his years at Nissan where he purposefully put together on teams people from very disparate backgrounds, poets and architects and technologists and industrial designers. And he put them together because he knew that they would be uncomfortable. But most importantly, he knew that they would ask very different questions. We don't like being uncomfortable. We don't like being challenged and pushed from a perspective that may not be our own. But I'm submitting that creative abrasion is one of the key differentiators that design can bring to its own field even more and to broader fields. So let's go back to the story of the Chad student who challenged the Martha Stewart design team and said, that spray can of roach insect repellent is not good design. What can we learn from that student? The main thing we can learn is to reframe the question. So while I've been saying, I think the question is who gets to design, maybe the question is who's not designing. And here's what we can learn from this student from chat. The first is, his question to the Martha Stewart design team helps us to ask and reconsider, who's the expert? Was the expert the creative design team from Martha Stewart, highly trained, or was the expert this other person with a lens and a set of questions that was a game changer for what they had been taking for granted? The second lesson from this student was this issue of perspective. Perspective is everything. And often when you're on the margins, it's on the basis of class, or if it's on the basis of gender, if it's on the basis of ability, you have a much more clear and distinct point of view. The other piece that we learned from this student is that we must design for creative abrasion. We must design for processes and operations that allow us to have sticky collisions and to push ourselves. So in conclusion, I hope that these questions that I've been thinking about a lot can be transferred out of design to other fields like medicine. Who gets to practice medicine? Who gets to practice law? And that we fundamentally remember that the more diverse the inputs, the more innovative the output. Thank you.